Look, everyone knows there's more than one way to skin a cat. I'm sorry, I take that back. Not skin a cat. Cook a steak. That's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be cooking a steak, technically the best method according to America's Test Kitchen. And I know what you're thinking. Of course there's more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, cook a steak. But what makes that the best way? Well, for starters, there's no mess. Secondly, it's very fast. You can't set off your smoke alarms using this technique, which is honestly pretty amazing. Also, there's no additional equipment required. All you need is a nonstick pan. So without further ado, let me share with you the cold sear. We begin with a ribeye. However, the cut isn't tremendously important. However, the thickness of the steak is. You want to make sure you start with a steak that's approximately 1.5 inches thick. Season with salt liberally at least 45 minutes before you intend to cook the steak. This draws out moisture and will allow for a better sear. If you don't have 45 minutes to spare, salt the steak after you cook it. It's been 1 hour since we salted this piece of meat. What we have to do now is remove some of the excess moisture and season with crushed black pepper. Tighten the adjuster on your pepper mill to create a finer grind. This will give the steak a better opportunity to sit flat on the skillet, resulting in a better sear. Make sure not to skip the sides of the steak as well. Now that our steak has been seasoned to perfection, the only thing left to do is put it in a frying pan and start the cooking process. Now we're not going to preheat the frying pan because this is a cold sear, remember. What we're going to do is take our non-stick frying pan. This is a 12-inch Tramontina, highly recommend, link in the description. I'm just going to take the steak, simply like this, and put this on the stove. Let's go. The first step is to turn on the heat to high while keeping a close eye on the steak. You should start to see and hear the fat begin to render out. After 2 minutes, flip the steak and reduce the heat to medium. This process, unlike most traditional methods, slowly builds the crust of the steak, eliminating a lot of the guesswork. With the heat on medium, continue to flip the steak every 2 minutes. The juices running out of the steak are the proteins and amino acids which normally get stuck to the bottom of the skillet. Cooking at a lower heat and using a non-stick pan allows those juices to get reabsorbed back into the steak. After 3 to 4 flips on each side, the steak will start to feel more firm to the touch. This is a good time to check the internal temperature, remembering that the steak will continue to increase about 5 degrees before reaching your desired serving temperature. The best way to check the temp is to mark the middle of the steak with your finger on the probe. Then insert the tip of the thermometer, making sure not to go past where your fingers are located on the probe. The crust of the steak came out pretty nice with some good caramelization forming on both sides. I'm keeping a close eye on this while I let it rest for 5 to 7 minutes. And I think it's pretty obvious why walking away wouldn't be a good idea. Rest time is over, so let's cut it open and see how we did. It is time now to do a taste test, and I know this might seem redundant because obviously it's going to taste good because it's steak and it's cooked to 130 degrees, which is medium, and if you like that, then you're going to like this. However, I will say, at my first impression before tasting it is that, yeah, it did a good job. The technique worked, and what was very nice is that it did cook it quickly. I didn't have to use any other special equipment that I didn't already have, and it was pretty fast. It cooked in about 10 minutes, a little less. Those are the plus sides. What I was hoping for was a little bit less of a gray portion on the top and on the bottom of the steak. You could still see that the portion which is cooked to perfection is still not as good as you would see on like a sous vide method. That being said, I'm not blown away. Refusing to call this a closed case, I bought another steak and began my second attempt. The goal for steak number 2 is to end up with a more uniformly pink center, so I kept the other variables the same as steak number 1, seasoning with salt, refrigerating for 1 hour before removing the steak, and seasoning with black pepper. The time has come to cook this steak, and we're going to do the same exact thing as last time with one variable change. Instead of high heat, we're going to go to medium high heat, and instead of going for 2 minutes, I'm going to go for 1 minute on each side. I think last time the initial contact from the high heat overcooked just the outer layer of meat a little bit too much, so we didn't get a uniform pink medium all the way through. Here's my skillet, let's put it on the stove. With the stove top set to medium-high heat, you can see when I flip the steak there's significantly less color on the initial turn. After 1 minute on each side, I turn the heat down to medium and continue to flip the steak every 2 minutes. After a few turns, the steak began to develop a deep brown crust similar to the first steak. I allowed the steak to rest for the same duration as steak number 1. Now let's cut it open and see if these minor adjustments were enough to improve the finished product. Guys, not turning the temperature up to high when I first started definitely made a big difference. And if you have a gas stove, I'm gonna say that it's probably different depending on the stove you have. Having an electric stove, the heat is much harder to control, as you could tell. So for the first steak I made, the heat just carried over a little bit longer than I wanted it to, and it penetrated both the top and bottom layer a little bit more. So by turning the heat down the second time around, I definitely got a more uniformly cooked steak. I'm very happy with this technique. It's simple, it's easy, it's quick, it won't set off your fire alarm, and you don't need any special equipment. I mean, that was the whole claim to fame in the first place. I do recommend you try this technique, especially if all you have is a non-stick frying pan. With all that being said, guys, keep busy, stay healthy, be happy, and I will see you in the next one.